Life's about making good decisions, and I don't think this is one of those for you.
Oh my God.
You've given me that arm on purpose, aren't you?
Hey guys, I'm giving away this new Kooler 2.0 signed by former world champion wrestler and Olympian Les Gutches. Stay tuned in to find out how to win.
Hey everybody, Rhino here, the world's strongest pro bodybuilder. Kind of a different format today. You know, I'm not much of a podcast guy. I've never hosted one before, but it's kind of a special opportunity. Long-time, old friend of mine came to town, called me up and said, hey, you want to get a workout in? So I said, yeah, come by the house. And I had to introduce him to you, and I just had to ask him about what's been going on, historically in his competitive career and currently in his new competitive career and the like. So without further ado, this is really raw. I just went in and grabbed my wife and said, hey, turn the camera on and let's have a chat. Let's just have a real, one-on-one here. So wave to the camera a bit. Do a reach around there. Yeah. That's why I married her, to reach around. So anyhow, I want to introduce you to Les Gutches. Les Gutches is a friend of mine I met back in the early 90s. He was wrestling at Oregon State University, and I was I had just graduated from the University of Oregon. I was training a bunch of football players and track athletes at the time, and Les had reached out to me, and we chit-chatted about his training. And I think that the topic, well, let me say a little bit more. Les was a two-time NCAA All-American. You were undefeated your junior and senior year. What was your record like?
So I was a 3-time All-American, 2-time national champion. And I won the Hodge Award, which is the Heisman for wrestling in my senior year.
Yeah. And then went on in World Championships?
Yep, I won the World Championships in 1997. I was third in 99.
National Championships?
Several. Yep.
Yeah.
And then
Pan Am Games.
96 Olympic team, I was 7th.
Yeah.
And then, I felt like 2000 was my team.
Yeah.
I'd matured, and I went back and forth with the best in the world, and I herniated a disc in my back, or re-herniated one, right before the 2000 games, and wasn't able to make the team, and ultimately that dream stopped there.
Yeah, something always happens like that. I mean, we say in the lifting business, the iron always wins.
Yep.
And that's kind of what I wanted to talk to you about, because back when you were in college training, I remember at the time that overtraining was a particular concern of yours, and that's what you were trying to address. How do I know when I'm overtraining? It's still a big concern. We talk about it all the time, how hard and how far you can push yourself. And back then, I think we talked about measuring your resting heart rate when you wake up.
Right.
And if it was 10 plus beats per minute elevated over normal, then you should probably take the day off.
Right.
Now these days we try and figure out ahead of time before we get there. And there's very limited actual measurable resources to use, one of which is really, they test the speed of the explosiveness of certain movements to see whether or not your speed's decreasing.
Yep.
And they'll see that for bar speed. But for you at the time, what do you think was the key to knowing how hard to train without training too hard?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's tough, right? Because, wrestlers are chronic overtrainers.
Exactly.
Chronic overtrainers. And, there's that guilt factor, right? Like, hey, if I take a day off, what if the guy I'm going to wrestle in the next dual meet isn't, right? Or what the Russian's not taking a day off. Or, you play all these mind games with yourself, right? And I think that's where having a really good coach comes in, because the best coaches in the world and the country, Cael Sanderson, Dan Gable, Tom and Terry Brands, John Smith, Tom Ryan, all the best wrestling coaches, they do a great job. They watch those guys. They can see how they're competing in the room. They can see how they're wrestling. They can see how they're recovering.
Yeah.
That's something you talked about, the resting heart rate. You told me about that in '94, my sophomore year of college.
Yeah.
And I used that through the rest of my competitive career, and I have a graph of my heart rate every morning for about 6 years.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
And what I started to find was that was a really good indicator, but also one of the leading indicators before I saw that increased resting morning heart rate was my recovery heart rate. So in other words, I go a hard go, and if I don't recover 40 beats a minute in 1 minute, I'm probably having trouble.
So that's a good predictor. That's something you can use before you get to the point where you have to say, I take it
So,
down?
eventually you just start to figure it out. I mean, it's a
Listen to
variety
your
of
body.
things, right? It's I'm not sleeping well. I don't have an appetite.
Yeah.
The things, I'm not excited about going fishing. I'm
Yeah.
not, you just,
It's funny, I just did a rant, and what did I call that rant? It was, what was the name of that rant I just put out? It was the difference between fitness and health. If you want to be healthy, don't compete. That was the rant I put out. And I said that very thing. When you're overtraining, you're going to start losing sleep almost immediately. That's what starts to happen.
Yeah.
And that, of course, affects everything downstream from there. But I talk about the fact that you have to continue to push yourself, like you said, because your opponent is pushing himself.
Yeah.
And you have to continue to take your body somewhere it hasn't been before to continue to progress. But at the same time, you're kind of in this gray area of am I going to get injured or am I going to make progress? And so you have to continue to keep checking in with yourself. And I reference the fact that a great coach or a great training partner can kind of help you with that. But
for sure. And I mean, you've been doing it a long time. I train with Andy Hammond. I mean, he has such great instincts, and he listens to his body. But I mean, there's this point where, I mean, I remember being a young kid, and you play all those games with yourself, right?
Yeah.
I'm not working hard enough. I'm not doing enough, and you try to convince yourself that volume's the key in terms of wrestling training.
yeah,
right?
sure.
You can be drawn into the same thing. I'm only as good as my last bench press. When, once you start to get that maturity and that time and those injuries, right? The injuries are the best teachers of all.
Yeah.
Because you had that feeling when you were under the bar, and you knew better, and you did it anyways, or you had that feeling before that go, and then you twisted your knee.
Yeah.
And so, at some point, you go from that, that younger athlete who doesn't have the instincts and doesn't have that wisdom, and as we all know, wisdom is not only intelligence, but it's experience.
Yeah.
And that's the nice thing, as we get older, we start to get that experience. And then we couple that with intelligence, we have wisdom. And so you start to have that instinctive, hey, I need a little more, I'm gonna back off, and you start to realize that overtraining has real consequences, right?
Huge.
Overtraining, even if you are competing,
Yeah.
right? I competed in the Masters Nationals this year, and there were certainly days that I came in and I just want to get after it, and I want to tear it up, and I wanted to, I wanted to win so badly.
But you're not growing if you're not recovering.
And you know what? You're not competing if you're injured.
Right.
Right? And so there's that fine
You're digging
line.
a 3-foot hole, only filling it up 2 feet, going back to the gym. I get it.
Yeah. So, that's the nice thing about being a little older and a little wiser, and you start to figure those things out.
Yeah. The big thing you say when you say overtraining, the first thing I think about is as we get wiser and older and better experienced, we start to learn ways to recover better.
Right.
That the young folks don't seem to employ as religiously as we did or do now. And things like they're paying your attention to sleep and the factors that affect sleep, such as maybe getting a blood test and finding out if you're vitamin D deficient, getting to bed at the same hour every night, waking up at the same time, having the blackout blinds, staying away from the electronics, all the things that go into optimizing that. So therefore you can recover from the workouts to optimize the workouts. So you do things differently now, and I preach this all the time about being able to train more because you're better outside the gym, and you're using better sleep, better nutrition. When we were in college, we kind of just ate whatever the fuck, it didn't matter, right? Yeah. And now we're really particular about the kinds of foods that we eat and when we eat them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you bring that up. You say we train differently, but as I get older, I realize the importance of routine and process, right? Yeah. And so a lot of people tell me, God, I'm not losing any weight. And I'll say, well, what are you eating? And they can't answer that, right?
It's a very good question.
Or
how much? They have no idea.
Or I'm not getting stronger. Well, how are you training, right? And there's no system to it, right?
Right.
And so, and I'm not saying you need to eat the same meal every day, but when I get rolling and I'm in the groove, I mean, I'm doing pretty much the same thing every day.
Yeah.
And I wait 2 weeks and I look at my improvement, and if I'm not getting leaner, it's pretty easy for me to go back and adjust because I know what I'm doing. You measured
it, you tracked it,
right?
Like you said about your resting heart rate, you track what you eat, you weigh it, you measure it so you can make the adjustments.
Same thing with my training. Hey, I'm not recovering. Well, I mean, I either need to ease up on the volume, I need to take a day off, I need to eat a little. I mean, you control the variables, right? And so many people don't realize they control the variables, or they have the power to control the variables, yet they aren't controlling.
I talked about that in my rant on training your metabolism, how important it was to eat the kinds of foods that your body will readily use and is accustomed to. I tell powerlifters all the time after they go weigh in on a 24-hour weigh-in, don't be introducing a whole bunch of new foods because they want to snack out on chips and sodas and sugar, thinking they're going to carb up for the big event tomorrow. But all they end up doing is just pounding their digestive system. I said the same thing about when I was working with Hofthor about going to the World's Strongest Man. Have your food there waiting for you. Order it in advance. Take it with you if necessary. Because don't get there and start foraging and end up at Domino's or Carl's Jr. or IHOP, because your stomach's going to reject all of that and you're not going to get the benefit from it. So I tracked on training your metabolism, even down to how many ounces that I was eating, so that over time I could increase or decrease that as my body responded. So you track that pretty closely as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's an interesting thing, right? I mean, it's once you've competed enough, you know that part of competition is preparing like you were going to compete, right? And so I prepared for every practice like it was a world championship, right? I took the same nap, I ate the same meals, I came in with the same mentality, and I approached it with the same intensity.
Yeah.
Right? And you know, one of the things I've learned in bodybuilding is you hear these guys talking about these crazy things that they're going to do pre-competition, or then their carb up, or in their, and I'm like, well, I mean that doesn't sound right to me, right? There's certainly an aspect of that, right?
Yeah.
But when you do extreme things, you can get extreme results either way, right?
Right.
You can look great, or you can look terrible.
I want to get 2% better, I end up 20% worse.
Right, and
It's usually
the
what
other,
happens.
the other thing is they do things that they've never done before, right?
Yeah.
And so why wouldn't you test that 3-4 weeks out and see how you actually look and respond to it?
Yeah.
And so, I thought the last week in bodybuilding was really interesting, because you can make a few percent of difference, but it's all discipline, it's sticking to the plan, it's not doing anything crazy, and
Being
it's
ready ahead of time.
Yeah.
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 But you said something really interesting. You said you prepare for a workout, not just a competition. You prepare for every training session. And I've said oftentimes that the second you're done lifting, you should be working on recovery and then preparing for the next session. Sunday's leg day starts on Friday.
That's right.
Every hour of sleep, every glass of water, every meal, all of that, every ounce of sodium, all of that went into, so that when you get there on Sunday, it's not pot luck. You already know the outcome. You're going to be savage in the gym during that workout. And you had to prepare just as well or just as hard outside the gym, sleeping, eating, discipline, etc., for all of the wrestling training that you did all those many years.
That's right. And yeah, I mean, you have to do that, right? Because the real training starts when it gets hard.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, anybody can come in and warm up and go through the motions and, hit a couple heavy ones and rack it when it still feels pretty comfortable, right?
Yeah.
And there's a fine line, right? Because if you start to lean forward in your squat and you're losing form, put it up, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, it's, that true growth, whether it be mental growth, physical growth, spiritual growth, mental toughness, I mean, that only starts to occur when everybody else stops, right?
Yeah.
When most people stop, when it really hurts and things are burning and you want to, you're thinking about quitting and you're losing concentration, that when you push yourself for a few more, whether it be minutes of wrestling or squats or that pump off set that you do, and that's when true growth occurs.
A few things you hit on. Let's see if I can keep track of these, because it's really interesting stuff. One thing you said is mental toughness. And I saw an interview with you once, or maybe it was just something that you talked about on the internet, about being prepared. And you talked about how the big events, like the Olympics, how do you prepare for the Olympics? Well, you can't really put yourself in that position necessarily. And you talked about preparing ahead of time, so when you got there, it was just another match. It was just another practice. It was just another meet. It wasn't some extraordinary thing that you got all stressed out about. So that goes back to, you say, your preparedness. In powerlifting, we talk about every time we approach the bar, whether it's 135, 2 1/4, 315, 405, every time we approach the bar, we go through the same process, so that when we get to the platform and it's 800 pounds, it's the same thing. We don't have to psych ourselves out or get adrenaline dump because we're in some crazy sort of environment. So talk to me about that.
Yeah. So I had a routine, and I never broke it. And I'll back up. I had 2 routines. I had a routine when I had all the time in the world, and I kind of had a short form routine, because there are times when you get stuck in traffic and you get to the venue late and you've got to go, right? And so I kind of had a plan for both of those contingencies. I mean, a big part of my warm-up, I'd go and I wanted to get my heart rate up very high in my warm-up, because I didn't want the first time that my heart rate hit 180, 200 to be in the match that day, right? And so I want to get a good warm-up, I want to get a good sweat going. I was meticulous about my planning. I was going to train and warm up so hard that my clothes were soaked, and that's why I had a towel, I had an extra pair of sweat gear, I had an extra cotton shirt, because I was going to soak the ones I was in. I was going to put those cool down a little bit, dry off, put my dry clothes on, and then I went and found a nice dark, quiet spot, or as quiet as I could, and I'd visualize. Visualization was a really important part of my preparation and training, both pre-match and during the week. And I'd visualize myself from my perspective and my coach's perspective going through all my techniques. And I'd also visualize negative things in the match happening and me responding to them positively, right? So, hey, what happens if I get thrown on my back? No problem. I'm gonna bridge off my back, I'm gonna reverse the guy, I'm gonna, here's what I'm gonna do. I had a plan. What's it gonna look like when I win? How confident am I going to look? What kind of confidence am I gonna project when I walk out on the mat, right?
Yeah.
How am I gonna show them that I expect to win, right? How am I gonna project that error, right? I'm gonna win like a champion. I'm gonna get my hand raised, I'm gonna walk off like I expected to win. Not arrogant, not cocky, just like I expected to. How am I going to crank up the intensity in the third period as, my opponent starts to wither, and how am I gonna break them, right?
Yeah.
And what's that gonna look like, and how's it gonna feel, right?
Yeah.
I would visualize all of those things, positive and negative. Bad call by the referee, no problem, let's go, let's get back at it. And so I tried to the extent that I could prepare for every contingency. So, not only physically, we do that in the wrestling room, but also mentally, because that mental reaction is the most important. Right? Our bodies are physically strong.
Yeah.
It's whether our minds are ready to handle the stress and the challenge. And so I would train mentally for that, and that was part of my mental toughness training, is just going through that routine and being prepared for every contingency. And then, I would say beyond that, you talk about mental toughness, and you see those guys who can just really dig deep when it gets hard, and that was always really interesting to me. And in my experience, when that happened for me, I had a couple times, man, I was in some tough matches where the crowd was against me and the match hadn't been going my way and the referee had made calls against me, and it just seemed like, I had a 100-mile headwind, right? And I remember thinking about quitting. And in those instances, I remember in that split second that I thought about quitting, the entire season of preparation just seemed to flash, before my eyes. I just remembered it, all at once. And I remembered all the stitches and all the time throwing up in buckets next to the mat, because I had guys rotating in on me, and all the hard work and all the morning runs and all the sacrifice and all the failed relationships and all the, the things that go into trying to be the best in the world and the best in the country. And so in that split second, that would kind of just flash before me, and I thought, no way. I've got too much into it. Let's go. I want this. I've prepared harder than this guy has, and I'm not about to let it slip through my fingers, and I put too much into it.
Yeah.
And so, I know it's a long explanation, but I just think that when you work your ass off and you do everything humanly possible, it's really hard to get low, because you've got too much into it.
I got like goosebumps listening to that just now, because it's on such another level. And a lot of the people in my audience, bodybuilding fans, powerlifting fans, etc., and they're younger. They tend to be a younger audience, oddly enough. And so their recollection is not too terribly specific when it comes to wrestling. WWE maybe, but not actual wrestling. So the things you're talking about, I lived through a lot of it, and I followed a lot of it for many years, although I've been away from the sport for a long time. And you mentioned some great names, some amazing names. Dan Gable, to begin with, one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, who had a work ethic that was just extraordinary. And, won a gold medal and national championships, and, became just a great coach. People migrated to him, and he got so much out of them. You talked about, you mentioned Cael Sanderson. Now, Cael was probably in our time one of the greatest wrestlers of modern time. Undefeated in college, but he had like 160 some to 0 in terms of wins. Won a gold medal in the Olympics. But in 2000, you met Cael on the mat, and you wrestled him. And what happened there?
Well, Cael's a great wrestler, and arguably one of the best we've ever had.
Yep.
And I was older.
So were you.
And had some experience.
So are you.
And he was younger coming up.
And it was freestyle, and he was doing something different. I get it.
But
Cael's great.
We had a heck of a match, and I was lucky enough to come out on top. And a ton of respect for Cael, and he's done some great things with the Penn State program.
Still epic, and I just, we're not here to brag, but you were you wrestled with the greatest wrestlers of all time, and were one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, and had the opportunity to get in there. Here's a name that the audience will probably remember, Yoel Romero.
Yeah.
He's ranked #2 in the middleweights in the UFC now, so he's got a huge audience. He's very popular. People recognize him.
he's 40 years old now.
Yeah.
He's still at the top of his game. But you were in there with Joel
We went
over
back
and over
forth.
again.
We went back and forth. Yeah, he was a great, unbelievable athlete. He still is. Right?
Phenomenal.
And going back a little further, did you watch the movie Foxcatcher?
Yeah.
So I trained with Mark and Dave Schultz as a young kid because they were from the Medford area.
Yep.
And when I used to train with Mark, I was in a senior in high school, and he was coming off the '88 Olympics, and I call those the Godzilla versus Bambi workouts.
Yeah.
I've never taken such a beating.
Yeah.
But you bring up some good points, right? I mean, you've been successful in business, and part of that is just part of that is what you've learned in athletics, right? I mean,
Yeah.
You've learned a lot of lessons, a lot of perseverance.
Consistency,
picking
determination,
yourself up,
perseverance,
dusting
the
yourself
intangibles.
off.
Yep.
The
Yep.
ability to compete, right? A lot.
Yeah.
I mean, in this society, sometimes people don't actually learn to compete. We're
Yeah.
a participation-driven, driven society where competition isn't what it used to be,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And for that reason, I think that's what's great about sports,
Yeah.
right? Whether it be, I'm a little bit biased towards individual combative sports or
Sure.
individual sports in general because I think
It's all on your shoulders.
they forge character pretty quickly
Yeah.
in a very unique way, right?
Yeah.
But any sport, a team sport, you learn to work with your teammates and succeed as a whole. Individual sports, you learn how to go out there and put it out on the line against everybody else, whether it's
Yeah.
a 400-meter dash or a squat or a wrestling match. And that's why I think sports are so important, right? Because I have my son and my daughter in sports because I want them to learn life's lessons
Yeah.
through sports and to build character,
Self-confidence.
all of those things that come with
Yeah.
that. Because one of these days they're going to find themselves in a boardroom. One of these days they're going to find themselves working through an illness with a loved one, or they're going to find themselves having to compete for something, and that's life, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the beauty of sports. It's an environment where you're having fun and you can learn life's lessons. You can become a better person, and you can
Yeah.
be around a bunch of great positive role models and your coaches and learn from them. And it's just
You said something interesting. You said we don't compete like that anymore, or that it's we've kind of pushed back
Yeah.
against how hard we push kids.
Yeah.
I think that there's even been a movie on that, Trophy Kids. I think that Chris Bell was involved in, Mark Bell's brother, Chris Bell. They talk about how dads push their kids too hard, and everybody gets a trophy, and there's no winners and no losers, et cetera, et cetera. And it was kind of my point when I did my rant on if you want to be healthy, don't compete, is that we're really cautious about things like concussions, how hard you push yourself, and as we should be. You got to stay healthy in order to compete. But it seems like everything that's happened in the fitness industry and sports in general over the last 40 years has progressively been to make things easier on people, not harder. And therefore, if your goal is to become a professional athlete, I think you're being misled, because you do need to forge, some sort of steel or iron out of a young athlete at some point by continuing to challenge them without breaking them.
Right.
And you fortunately had a father who wrestled, uncles who wrestled. Somebody like Cael had 3 brothers that wrestled, and great coaches. You see this with Tiger Woods' father. You see this with Serena Williams' father. Even with somebody like Beyonce, growing up with a dad who every single day had a certain expectation, and then also you saw the level of competition with your uncles and all of your over the years that you wrestled, as did Cael with his brothers, etc. As you mentioned from the movie, those guys going at it all day long. So you got, tell us about what you see now that you're a coach coaching young athletes, trying to be cautious of not breaking them, but there's still pretty heavy demands to compete at that level.
Yeah.
You competed and wrestled against Russians who are recruited at age 3 and live with the state in training camps, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what you're going up against. Are you putting yourself in the position to be competitive with that?
Yeah, and this is a 3-hour discussion in and of itself, but
Yeah.
I do have a couple thoughts on it.
Yeah.
I think you see those athletes who are pushed crazy hard by their parents, right?
Yep.
I've seen that fail way more times than it's succeeded,
Yeah.
right? And in some cases, it's what they call the survivor effect, right? Like yeah, a couple actually make it through and still have some type of relationship with their father and actually make it and they are successful. And that exception is used to prove the rule, right?
Well, we see that with the Bulgarians. They have this extraordinary training program and they show the success of it, but they don't show all the people that fail.
And so I'll tell you from personal experience what the pivotal point in my career, without a doubt, was.
Yeah.
At some point, parents have influence over what their kids do, right?
Yeah.
You're driving your kids to the sport and you're kind of pushing them in one direction.
Yeah.
Hopefully not too hard, right? You want to get them into it. You want them to get that experience. In my case, my kids, I try to get them a broad experience. Let's play basketball. Let's wrestle. Let's.
We talked about that. The more sports, the better.
Yeah, because you build that general athletic base.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
But for me, I remember when it happened. I was 12 years old. I was wrestling because my dad wrestled, and he clearly liked me to wrestle. I had some aptitude for it. It was pretty good. I didn't have to try really that hard to win matches, and it started to get hard because everybody else started to get good as well, right? And so at 12 years old, I'd been wrestling for 4 years, and it was starting to get really competitive, and you had to really work hard, and I kind of felt like I was wrestling for my father and my uncle, right? And I remember telling my dad, I said, hey, I think I'm going to take this year off wrestling. And I don't know if he planned it, if it was a stroke of parenting genius, or it was just the mood he was in that day. But he said, hey, whatever you want to do, bud. But the only thing is you're going to either get a job, you're going to do something, chores around the house, or you're going to play another sport, because you're not going to, to quote my dad, you're not going to sit on your ass from 3 to 6. Right. And I said, okay. I was kind of surprised, right? Because I expect him to, say, no, you need to wrestle. We've got too much into this. I've driven you too many places and put too many practices in. And so, yeah, fine, I'll do some chores. And so, the next day, 3 quarts of wood was dumped off, and I had something to do for the winter. And it wasn't punitive. It wasn't like, but it was just, we needed some wood for the winter, and I wasn't going to be doing anything from 3 to 5, and so that's what I was going to do. And so I split wood, and I was perfectly happy doing it. And about 3 weeks into the season, kids were coming in and saying, yeah, you hear about the kid who won your weight class at this tournament.
I could beat him.
And talked about the Jello squares that the moms were bringing and the chili dogs that they had at the tournament. And I started to miss it, right? And I realized that I actually did love wrestling, and I loved it because I loved it, not because my dad wanted me to do it. And so I decided that I wanted to wrestle. I wanted to wrestle.
Yeah.
And I came back to my dad 3 or 4 weeks into the season and said, you know what? I think I made a mistake. It's not because of all the wood. I just want to wrestle.
Right.
And he goes, yeah, sure. Hey, whatever you want. But if you go back out, you're going to stay out, right? And I said, yeah, no problem. And that was the day that I stopped wrestling for my father, or the expectations I thought my father had.
Yeah.
And I wrestled for myself. And the important thing about that is, I think we forget what it's like to be a 10 or 12-year-old kid, thinking that dad's love is connected to our last match or our last run in the flag football game or our last whatever, right? That's a kid's world, right?
Sure.
And we know how much pressure we put on ourselves. To me, wrestling was life or death.
Yeah.
To me, getting fourth in the Masters Nationals bodybuilding competition pisses me off.
Right.
I'm mad. Right. That's all I'm thinking about for the next 9 months, getting back there. But we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. But imagine yourself in that 10-year-old kid's shoes, feeling like Dad's not going to love you.
You're going to disappoint him.
Right, and that was the worst, disappointing my dad, right?
Yeah.
Because I respected him so much.
Sure.
And clearly he was a man who deserved respect, which how he dealt with that situation. And so that was the day I started wrestling for myself. And I think too many kids don't, either their fathers push them or they don't have that ability to make that conscious decision, right? And you go from 12 kind of resenting a little bit to 13 resenting it a lot to 14 hating your father or your parents because you feel like they're making you do this and feel like the weight of the world's on their shoulders by their time they're 15, and you have this kid who could have been an Olympic champion quit because of the pressure they feel in their own home, right? Yeah. And so I think that the sooner, I understand you have to push kids a little bit out of their comfort zone because it's very comfortable to sit on your ass and play Nintendo or whatever they play these days, right? And so I agree, teaching kids work ethic, getting them out of the house, making them do something and push themselves outside of their comfort zone.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think the sooner those kids are able to make that decision that they want to really specialize and try to excel and be the best in a sport, the sooner they can make the decision that they want that rather than mom and dad wants it, the better.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's when they're truly free to go be their best.
I'm not going to pick the door, but I'll help you
get through it.
That's right.
When you choose it.
Right.
And that's when you jump in and say, you know, you want to give them the resources necessary, whether it be the coaches or, you know, driving them to practice, etc. You know, you said something interesting, and it kind of comes back to grit. We talked about consistency, determination, drive, etc. And I've said before in my rants and interviews that I don't know where that comes from, and I don't think you can teach it necessarily. That the key to success isn't necessarily IQ or it's not the best predictor. It seems that grit is, the intangibles, just consistency, determination, drive, intensity, all of those things. And you had it in spades. I remember coming and watching a match with you at the University of Oregon when you were at OSU. And I brought my dad, and I wanted him to see you wrestle.
Great to meet him, by the way.
Yeah, he's 87, not on a single medication.
Yep.
Yeah. You know, your level of intensity was at a whole nother place. And, you know, I talked in my rant recently about people's perception of intensity. You know, when you go to the gym and you think you're working out hard, and you take it to, like, you know, 1 rep away from failure. And I'm like, well, you're 1 rep away from failure. And I referenced a savage powerlifter, Dan Green. Mm-hmm. And his 1 rep away from failure are on 2 completely different planets. Right. Dan will do a lift and it'll look like a max, and then he'll do 4 more reps, and they'll all look like he's going to crumble underneath them. Now, whose intensity, you know, what is 1 rep from failure? The point being is I came and watched you wrestle, and your level of intensity was on a whole other planet. The guy was literally running out of the frickin' circle, because in the circle, you would take him down and purposely let him up so you could take him down again, and you didn't take him down nicely. I mean, the coach came running out, yelling at the referee because his guy was getting brutalized. I mean, he was trying to run out of the match so much that at one time you shoved him and he went all the way over into his team and his coach. But you know, it was almost embarrassing. But I saw this drive in you, and it's the same drive that made you an academic All-American. It's the same drive that caused you to go get your MBA. It's the same drive that made you not only be successful in the business world, but to become a great coach and successful in coaching your athletes. And so now I gotta know, because I don't think you can teach that. How do you see that or recruit that, or maybe you teach that to your athletes now? Because you coach the world team, the USA.
You know, I manage the national teams program, so I hire the coaches and manage the program. And
okay. But you
certainly
coached at OSU as well, and okay.
Yeah.
How do you get the most out of your athletes? What's the key? Because a lot of us are coaches. You know?
Yeah. I mean, I think the key to intensity, I mean, I know you've been there, right?
Yeah.
You feel like you are going to die if you don't get what you're working for, right? And I think CT Fletcher, I love him. I love to watch him before Army.
I do too, yeah.
But you know, I won't quote him perfectly, but he said, if you can't get obsessed with that which you want, you're never going to have it.
Yeah.
Right? And it's something like that, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, it has to be an obsession, right?
Yeah.
It has to be an obsession. I'm telling you, I would have rather, there's a point, and I'm afraid almost to admit this, but people watching this will probably resonate with, I felt like I would die. I'd rather die than lose a match, right? That's how much it meant to me. Now, whether that's sane or that's healthy, probably not.
It's not.
Right?
And I'm quick to admit it.
Yeah.
And there's a difference between participating and competing.
Yeah.
There's a difference between health and fitness.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, I wasn't suicidal if I lost, but I mean, it was that important, right?
I cried.
Oh.
If I got pinned, fuck yeah, I was cheers, I was pissed, I was so mad. I wanted to come back, and I understand.
I've ritually burned a few wrestling shoes after losing with lighter fluid. But
at
any rate, it's yeah, I mean, it has to be an obsession, right? And I see a lot of people, and sometimes I'm jealous of them, right? You see people who are satisfied with mediocrity. And they're some of the happiest people you'll ever meet, right?
You hit that, yeah.
It's like man, they're
I'm not saying what we're talking about is a good place to be. I'm
no.
saying it's a necessary place to be.
I'm not either, right? I mean, I understand.
I'm trying not to do that to myself
No,
now.
I get
My
it.
new rules do no harm.
Yeah.
But
I mean, you see those people that I mean, it's very hard to understand if you're wired this way. That you want to be the best you can be. You want to be the best in the world. You strive for excellence. You strive for perfection, right? And you're upset and pissed off if you get anything less. And it's just, maybe it's a short circuit and something's miswired somewhere. But I was obsessed about it. And if you can't get obsessed about it, you're not going to be the best in the world.
I agree, and I get some negative feedback about that. I think people hit me up and they're like, Stan, that's not healthy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you're right. And
I'm
that's
not
why
preaching.
that's why I
I'm
said
not preaching.
competing isn't healthy.
So,
But the reason I bring it up is because it's one thing to be passionate and to want it more than anything else in the world and to be willing to die for it. That's one thing. Another thing is understanding the methods and techniques necessary to get there, or to somehow compensate and repair for, and those are the techniques that we talked about. More outside the gym than inside the gym. Talk about how important it is to sleep, to eat, to track whether or not you're getting into a fatigue state. We talked initially about measuring the blood pressure, and now you're talking about your VO2 max recovery rate. And I want people to be as meticulous in their planning outside the gym as you were. I said many times, I have an Excel spreadsheet. I still do, and I don't compete. Every morning, my wife laughs at me. I've got my weight, my body weight, every vitamin D I take, every meal I eat, every 10-minute walk I take, whether it's therapy, your etc.
cardio can be therapy.
Yes, cardio can be therapy, mentally, all of that stuff. But I'm saying is that it's fascinating to see your career and to talk to you about the drive and the passion, but to see why it all really happened, the preparation, the practice, on the field and off the field, in the gym, outside the gym, etc. That you were meticulous about that, every bit of it.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned something. I think that, especially for the younger kids, and it's crazy now. I'm almost 45. To me, a younger kid's 25, right?
Right.
And when I was 25, 45 was really old. But
Right.
but I mean, you see the younger kids in the gym or in the wrestling room. They think that a career is maybe a year, and they think that because they see you that they can be like you in 3 years of hard training, right?
Yeah.
And that's not the way it works. It's a marathon. It's a marathon. Even though it is bodybuilding or it is wrestling, it's not a sprint, right?
Right.
And a little bit of improvement every day over 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
That's how you get there, right?
Yeah.
And if you try to shortcut by overtraining or doing some of the other things that people do, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to get the results you want.
Right.
You're going to be hurt. You're going to be sick. You're going to be whatever.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that's the other thing. You see these, and I'm not saying you can't push it, but you've got to be sane. You've got to be meticulous about it. You've got to stay, in that you can't overtrain. You have to recover. You have to do things right. You can't lift your ass off in the gym and squat 600 pounds and then go party like a wild man all weekend and not eat right and eat hot dogs and come back in and think you're a bodybuilder or think you're going to be a champion wrestler.
And you also have to continue to learn and continue to put yourself in the position to succeed by getting, with great coaches, great training partners, which is what you did. That's why I went down and lived with Flex. That's why I went over and lived with Mark Bell. That's why I went out to spend a summer with Eddie Cohn out in Chicago. I took every opportunity I could to learn as much as I could. I worked with Dave Palumbo. I worked with Charles Glass. I've traveled around and gone to seminars, and Boris Shaco Charles Poliquin, yeah, learned a lot from him, and then had the opportunity to do seminars with him, and a lot of great stories and experience there. Boris Shaco's seminar, where he talked about what you just said, it's a marathon, and he spent a great deal of time talking about how the Russians, because he was an Olympic weightlifting coach for many, many, many years, and trained an extraordinary number of great athletes. And he would talk about how they would make a 5-year plan.
Tudor Bump Up, that was his.
Yes.
If you've read that, I don't know if you've read that book, but it's amazing the periodization that they had back in the 50s.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
They saw it as a marathon, as a career, not as this Instagram, I got something coming up this weekend I want to shoot and put out, on social media.
Yeah. Charles Poliquin, he says, he says it a lot, but he says, yep, it took me 30 years to become an overnight success.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
But one of the things that you just said, I've done that as well, right? You put yourself around as many great people as you can. Yep. And it's not always a great person, right? You can learn something in the gym from some old school guy who used to train in Venice in the 70s who showed you what Arnold used to do, and he's not big, right? But you can learn something from everyone, right? Yeah. And I love being around people like you and Andy Hammond and Charles Poliquin, and I want to learn as much as I can, right? And when I was a wrestler, I got around as many great wrestlers as I could, and I think the thing that you have to realize is everybody's different, right? The way you bench isn't the way I bench. The way you recover from leg day isn't the way I recover from leg day.
Exactly.
And so what you need to do is you need to get this broad base of knowledge from all of these people and pluck from you what works, from Andy what works, from Charles what works,
Yep.
from the internet and articles and whatever
Yep.
you can, you piece it together because, you know, you're your own trainer at the end
Yeah.
of the day, right?
I got to say what you're talking about, Andy Hammond, and the young people in the industry. You know, when he came out into the bodybuilding industry, and he's got the spiked hair, and he's got the funny costumes on, and he's doing the funny, you know, and everybody's like, "Who's this goofball?" Nobody understood that fucking savage used to wrestle for Dan Gable.
Oh yeah,
He was a heavyweight at Iowa State or University of Iowa. He was
University of Iowa.
University of Iowa. Was recruited by and wrestled for, and it was a savage wrestler. And if that's, you know, not enough in and of itself, I mean, the guy, was he 50 years old, benched 600 pounds.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and he was a teacher for 15 years, and he's raised an extraordinary family of just great kids. And when I see him, I think he's doing great things for the industry. He's making it fun and entertaining and interesting. And on another note, just last weekend, he comes to Vegas and goes to the hospital and visits the victims of the shooting to put smiles on their face with his funny, goofy-looking stuff on, to give back to these people. And there isn't a better person than anybody who's ever curious about who Andy Hammond is. That's a bigger picture to help you understand. What an extraordinary guy.
Well, yeah, he's a great guy.
Yeah.
I mean, he does things like that. There's no sponsor lining that up. He's not getting paid to do that.
No.
He goes because he likes to make people smile and he likes to make the lives of others better. And
Yeah.
so he's been my training partner for the last 3 years and taught me so much. He's a really, really great person. But I mean, the problem is, I weigh 235 and just, you know, I'm a
He's
pretty
a big,
decent sized
strong
guy,
dude.
and I feel anorexic
I
and
know.
anemic around him every day.
I do too.
It's-
He's a big, thick dude.
and strong.
Yeah, and strong
I mean, I
as
get
hell.
tired from just taking the
Yeah.
weights off so I can do my sets. It's just
Yeah.
ridiculous.
And you've worked with Randy Couture?
Yeah,
some over
yeah.
the
Randy
years?
Couture was my college coach.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's amazing. He's right here in Vegas, got his own school, and what an amazing coach. You know, I could go on for hours, but I know that I turned the grill on so we could throw some bison
awesome.
burgers on, and I'm glad you came, but there's one last thing I want to do. I've traveled all over the world, and I've met extraordinary athletes, and I'm always humbled by the level of talent that's out there.
Yeah.
When I was coaching, or not coaching, but I was training, doing strength and conditioning and nutrition for football players, some of the guys, one in particular was an offensive lineman for the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Denver Broncos. And I would get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, we'd go out to the field and we would do some of the work together. And I would block with him. He's 6'4", 320 pounds, and just monstrously strong. And it really helps you understand at a whole nother level how much talent and strength and just extraordinary athleticism is involved with a football lineman or Randy Couture or someone like yourself. So this isn't planned, none of this was orchestrated, but I want to tie up.
Oh my God.
I want to get some grips and pulls on. Don't hurt me. I got some fucking issues. I got shoulder issue, back issue. I'm making excuses.
Don't
but
push me into anything here.
let's just move some stuff out of the way. And I want to get the camera. And I just want to be turned into a 6-year-old kid here.
Do we have life insurance?
Now I haven't wrestled in 25 years.
Life's about making good decisions, and I don't think this is one of those for you.
Oh my God.
That's 1-0. That's 2-0. All right, need a little more of that. A little more wrist lock. Oh shit! Just like that. That's 3-0. All right. Okay, that's 4-0.
Oh my God.
We're gonna go to 5.
You can start trying. Come
I'm
on.
gonna make my comeback here.
Okay.
All right. You're giving me that arm on purpose, aren't you? Oh yeah. Oh, shit. That's 5-0. Oh, that's good.
Oh my God.
That's 5-0. I think I won that one, didn't I?
Thanks for letting me win.
Thanks, Biggs. Great interview. Thanks, guys, for joining us. Me, Les Gutches. It's been awesome. Kooler, out.
Oh, shit.
Oh, that was great.
That's embarrassing.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in, and let me tell you how to win that new Kooler 2.0 signed by Les Gutches, world champion wrestler. So here's what I want you to do. Go to Les's Instagram page. It's at Les Gutches, LESGUTCHES, at Les Gutches. First, I want you to click the follow button, and then go down and open up his most recent post, which is a picture of him on the Masters Nationals bodybuilding stage. And I want you to enter a comment. And the comment's gonna say, hey Les, Stan kicked your ass. Enter that, and I'll pick a winner. And I'm also gonna give away 2 more Koolers to people who make comments, saving one for the girls, right here, the pink one, and the grand champion, Les's signed Kooler. Thanks for listening in, guys. All my best.